Well, good evening. My name is Bob Donaldson. Thank you very much for coming out tonight, on a Friday night. And tonight I'll be talking about the Bluestone industry in Ulster County. To give you a little background, I was a teacher for 40 years. I taught for 10 years over at the Rhinecliff Union Free School, Holy Cross campus back in the 1970s. And then I was the first teacher to defect to Rhinebeck High School, where I taught U.S. history, but mostly European history, and then in the 80s created the law-related education program, teaching civil, criminal, and constitutional law, as well as trial procedure through the mock trial program. I also became an adjunct instructor of law at Dutchess Community College, teaching introduction to law as well as legal research. So how does one get moved from reading court cases and researching the court cases and studying the lives of the tutors over to the town of Kingston, all right, and the Bluestone trade? And the answer is genealogy, all right? Long before Ancestry had their advertisements on television, I asked my father, who was born in 1911, about his family, and he didn't really know much, because his father having died 2 months before he was born. And he said they came somewhere north of Kingston, they were quarrymen, and that's all he knew. A few snippets of little stories, which I'll relate. So before you had Ancestry and the internet, I was going to museums and archives, and later on I landed up at the old town of Kingston Town Hall, which was in a one-room schoolhouse, and I asked the clerks there if they had any information on William Donaldson, my great-grandfather, which they did, and they showed me. And one of the clerks, Laura Joy, said, in the back closet we got 16 boxes of archives that were created by the town historian Harry Simmons, who died in 1975. Now, this is the year 2000, and no one's looked at them in 25 years. Would you like to look at them? Would I like to look at them? Yes. So I spent that whole summer going through the 16 boxes, and I found all sorts of records and information that Harry Simpson had collected. And he also collected stories from the newspapers about the quarrymen and the Irish immigrants and the political parties of the town of Kingston. So what I decided to do was do a little research, continue where Harry had left off, which led me to the City of Kingston Library, where you have all the old newspapers on microfilm. And so between the year 2000 up to about 2013, 13 years of research, I would sit at the microfilm machine. Nothing's indexed. So when I started researching the articles around 1875, 1876, 1877, I found so many different things. I said, wait a minute, I want to go back. But going back meant going back to the 1840s, all right? Which led me down to New York City to the 42nd Street Library, the Museum of the City of New York, other archives, all right? And then after 13 years of research and then writing at 2 o'clock in the morning to 5 o'clock in the morning, that's when I write, all right? I produced a 900-page book. It's a topical and chronological anthology. Now, Volume 2 deals with the town of Kingston. Everybody wants to read about the town of Kingston. But what it does is it gives you a whole perspective of what was life like for the townspeople at that time between the years 1850 up to 1900, but also goes into the political intrigue that pitted the Kingston Daily Freeman against the Irish Democratic political party of the town of Kingston. But that's another topic for another time. Volume 1 deals with the Bluestone trade, all right? Now, I did so much research over the years. I found a lot of articles and different periodicals on the internet. I didn't find any real books on the Ulster County Bluestone trade. So if I can give myself a little kudo, this might be the only book dealing with the Bluestone trade in Ulster County, all right? So, are we talking about any Pulitzer Prizes down the road or Bancroft Prizes? No, all right? A Ken Burns documentary? It would be nice, but no, we're not going to get that, all right? But could I have used an editor? Yep, all right? However, hiring an editor was cost prohibitive. So here it is, all right? You might ask at the end, where can you buy one? Go upstairs and order one on the library rental list, okay? And get it through the library system, all right? So enough said on that. Let's get into the Bluestone industry. So the book, the Volume 1 starts with an article from the 1890 Journal of Scientific American that came out in 1890. And the author of the article talked about the Bluestone industry, North River Bluestone of Ulster County. And he began the article by saying that, if you were to ask people who walk on the sidewalks of the city each day, if they know from where that flagstone on the sidewalk came, or the bluestone used on the buildings and the bridges and the monuments, if they had any idea from where it came, they would most likely respond, I'm blessed if I know. However, if the people took the time to look around them and look at their buildings and their monuments and the bridges and the sidewalks, they would have found that Bluestone did have a big impact on their physical environment, all right? So to begin with here, using some slides, all right? Your state capitol building up in Albany, New York, all right, when it was built, relied upon bluestone from Ulster County, all right? The Brooklyn Bridge, all right, the caissons on the Brooklyn Bridge relied upon Ulster County bluestone, all right? Now, there was some debate about this at the time. Some of the articles years later said that bluestone from Ulster County, the town of Kingston, was used, but there was no definitive article about that. Right? So there was always in these articles they would say, well, we're trying to find out, what bluestone quarry supplied the stone if it did come from the area of the town of Kingston. And I was able to find information, okay? Now, in his book, David McCulloch, The Brooklyn Bridge, all right, the great bridge, in his book here, he recorded, all right, it took 3 courses of stone in most of June before the vast wooden box was grounded on the bottom to stay. Now, this is one of the caissons, all right? So he's talking about the stone up here now. The first stone to be placed on the top, the cornerstone, as it were, was a block of blue limestone from the Kingston Quarry, 3 feet by 8, weighing up to 5,800 pounds. There was no particular ceremony that went with it, and so far as we know, nothing even carved on it. Still, there was some debate. Did the stone come from a quarry in the area of Kingston? So by going to these libraries, you find out this information, all right? And I found it in the Kingston Daily Argus in 1871. Mr. Luke Noon is busily engaged in erecting derricks in his quarries, preparing getting out stone for the Brooklyn Bridge, which he will do as soon as possible. Bluestone dealers Luke Noon and John Madden are now employed about 200 workmen in their quarries and are shipping nearly 1,500 tons of stone every week to the Brooklyn Bridge. So we now know, all right, that the bluestone from the quarries in the town of Kingston were used on the bridge. All right, another picture there showing the cables going up, and of course we know Washington Roebling, all right, was the great engineer who built this bridge, and I'm sure some of you have walked across it. It's still fascinating to walk across that bridge today. Also, bluestone was used on the sidewalks of St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City. And I know from where that bluestone came because my father said the bluestone from Martin Stein's, his grandfather, all right, who owned a stone quarry in Stony Hollow, his bluestone was used on the sidewalks of St. Patrick's Cathedral. Now also, all right, William H. Vanderbilt, all right, beginning in 1878, wanted to have a mansion built for his son William K. Vanderbilt and his wife Alva. But there was one specification he wanted. He wanted bluestone in front of his mansion. And he wanted a bluestone piece that would measure 25 feet by 15 feet, and it had to be flawless. So he went to his chief architectural engineer and said, I'm offering a $10,000 prize to the quarry or the quarryman that produces this stone according to my specifications. Well, the engineer offered a $5,000 prize. Well, wait a second, I thought the price was $10,000. He offered $5,000, pocketing maybe the other $5,000. So there was some debate over the years, all right? Did the bluestone come from the town of Kingston, all right? And so by researching, all right, different newspapers, down in Port Jervis at their library, at the microfilm machine, I found the source, and it was not from the town of Kingston. A big stone for Vanderbilt. The flagstone measured 25 feet 2 inches, 15 feet wide, and 8 inches thick, that was quarried at the Hickok Quarry, Barryville in Sullivan County, for William H. Vanderbilt, has arrived in New York and safely laid in front of Mr. Vanderbilt's mansion on Fifth Avenue. The stone is said to be the largest one ever laid and cost from $5,000 to $6,000 to quarry, transport, and lay it. Now, when the mansion was built, and this mansion was named the Petit Chateau. Right? When it was built, Alva, the wife of William K. Vanderbilt, decided to have a masquerade ball in 1883 as like a big reception for the opening of their Petit Chateau. And she invited over 1,000 people, and the party, the masquerade ball, estimated cost $3 million. In today's dollars, that would be equivalent to $67 million, all right? Now, we know Keith Greene was at that party, and Keith, what was it like at that party? you on the spot. So but also, not only did Vanderbilt require such stone, right? Well, the stores where the rich purchased their jewelry, Tiffany Jewelry Store, all their sidewalk was made from bluestone from the town of Kingston, all right? The Singer Building, all right, between the years 1908 and 1909 was the tallest building in the world at 47 stories, all right? Bluestone from the town of Kingston was used on this building here, all right? So during the second half of the 19th century, urban construction projects throughout this state and this nation would utilize North River bluestone, affecting the lives of thousands of workers in Sullivan counties, Orange counties, but also in Ulster County. In Ulster County, the bluestone industry brought financial fortune to a few, financial ruin to many, all right, to some, but also hard and dangerous work for the quarry people who worked every day in the quarries producing this stone. Aside from the financial ups and downs of the industry, bluestone would generate a continuing legacy of the people who mined and transported the stone that is still visible on our streets today, all right, as well as in buildings and bridges throughout our cities. Whilst researching information about the origin of the bluestone industry, there were hardly any articles about it in the 1840s and the 1850s. I had to rely on articles in the 1870s and the 1880s that interviewed people who either grew up or worked in the early stages of this industry. So I had to rely on these snippets of information that people could recall, and what they came up with was that in 1826, a man by the name of Morey opened up a first bluestone quarry on what is now Morey Hill, which is right off Route 28 north of the city of Kingston. Now, to give you a perspective of where this is, get on Route 28 heading west-northwest, all right? And you're traveling up Route 28, you'll come to the Habitat for Humanity store on your right-hand side. If you'll notice, there's a little sign there for a right-hand turn. That's Jockey Hill Road, one of the great bluestone quarry sites, also a site of political intrigue, but that's another story. You can go up that road only so far, all right? The road becomes a very rough terrain with rocks and boulders, and even with your four-wheel drive Subaru, you're not going to get up that road, all right? Get back down to Route 28 and look across the street. There's a large white house, right? That is the Cold Spring House. And Louise Flood is the owner, and she's a great raconteur, all right, about the history of that area and the bluestone trade. Matter of fact, she told me that on Saturday was payday. But the paymasters from the Bigelow Company, from the Fitch Brothers Quarry House, they wouldn't go up to Jockey Hill or up to Stony Hollow. They went to the Quarry House. They set their pay station up on the pool table, and the workers came down. They would pay the workers, and as soon as the last worker was paid, the grill over the bar was open, and the drinks came out, all right? Much to the distress of the wife and family waiting at home for that paycheck, which most likely went across the bar to pay for the whiskey, all right? It was a hard life. They were hard drinkers in that bar. Louise told me, she was even able to show me bullet holes that in the wall that still exist from where they let loose with their pistols, all right? Later, a man by the name of Philip Lockwood entered the bluestone industry and was the first to have bluestone shipped from Kingston Point down to New York City, where he sold it to a stone merchant by the name of Donaldson, no relation. Whatever happened to that stone, we don't know. However, now in the 1840s, all right, in the 1850s, New York City started moving uptown, all right? And new buildings had to be built, not only for the commercial industries, but for the home of the wealthy. So seeing that there was a demand for bluestone, entrepreneurs like cousins Simon and William B. Fitch, right? Asa Bigelow, John Maxwell, the Sweeney brothers, Hewitt Boyce, right? Michael Hallahan, Luke Noon, John Fletcher Kilgore, Julius Osterhout, they took their money and they started purchasing land, all right? Land around Stony Hollow, Jockey Hill, the old town of Kingston, up in West Hurley, all right? Hoping that they could rent that land out to quarry owners to quarry it, and that's how they were going to make a profit. According to the New York State Museum of 56th Annual Report of 1902, a majority of the quarrymen did not own the land where they worked. Quarries were owned by dealers who leased such to the quarrymen. It was speculation for these hopeful investors. If the land held quality stone, rent would be calculated on the amount of stone shipped down to the docks in Kingston. Now, in Alf Everett's book, The Catskills, From Wilderness to Woodstock, the author wrote about the bluestone industry and the workers. And according to Alf Everett, If the stone yard owners were at the top of the Bluestone pyramid, the men who took the stone from the quarries were at the bottom. Theirs was not an easy or a safe job. Broken limbs, smashed hands, blindness, dust-related lung illnesses, and other calamities were frequent. The first possibility of an accident came when a promising ledge of stone was to be stripped of its top. This was the earth in the broken stone above the block of usable stone. The top was removed by blowing it off with blasting powder, which sometimes exploded prematurely with fatal results. Now, the next slide here is a slide of a West Hurley stone quarry taken about 1903. Most of the pictures we have of the stone quarries are in like at the 20th century, 1903, 1905. There are few, if any, photographs taken years before that. But you can see what this quarry is like. Up on the top there, you can see the top, all right? And that area at the time was blown off, all right? And hopefully underneath they would reach a good load of stone that could be quarried and later shipped down to New York City, all right? Now, continuing with Alf Ever's description of the Bluestone trade. Once a block was exposed, wedges were inserted along a horizontal seam known as a lift. And you can see one of them right here, all right, where they would insert wedges along and hammer them in and hopefully to lift the section off. Sometimes the stone crumbled above the wedges, and sometimes the lift cracked into many unusable pieces, but if all went well, the entire lift rose in one piece, which was occasionally as large as 60 feet. The next step was to cut the lift into rectangles. To do this, it was necessary to drill a series of holes along each proposed line of division. One man held a kind of drill called a jumper, while another struck the drill with a heavy sledgehammer. Now, holding a jumper was the responsibility of newcomers, all right? And according to Alf Evers, a newcomer could be a greenhorn, who arrived at Castle Garden, the Immigration Processing Center in New York City before there was Ellis Island, on Monday. And on Tuesday, he was up in the Hurley Woods holding a jumper, all right, learning the trade. Irish quarrymen like these left their mark upon the Catskills, according to Alf Evers said, and it's a mark well worth looking for. So to give you some idea of what the quarry's like, this here is a quarry of Stony Hollow in 1903, and you can see the slabs here of flagstone, okay, and other stones that would be cut into curbstone, right, that would be used in the cities in our nation here. The next slide here is Jockey Hill, again, 1903. And these are from the State Museum website and the Library of Congress. I was able to access these pictures as well. And the stone is not that good. You can see a lot of this stone here has crumbled, it's fallen down, it's broken, and this stone would later be called rubbish. And if you go up to Jockey Hill today, there are huge mountains of this rubbish still there. And I've walked up them and down into the old quarries, all right? Didn't tell my wife all this stuff here, but you have to avoid the copperhead snakes. They always say that if you smell cucumbers nearby, there's a copperhead sunning himself, okay? So I always have to be on the lookout for those. The next slide here is a quarry in Stony Hollow, 1903. And I'm kind of impressed with that because I know my great-grandfather, Martin Steins, owned quarries in Stony Hollow. And some of that, like I said, that stone was used for the sidewalks of St. Patrick's Cathedral. The next slide here is a quarry in West Hurley. Right? Now, many of these quarries that are in West Hurley are beneath the Ashokan Reservoir today. Right? And I'll show you some more pictures about that in a second. So, in the early years of the bluestone industry, there were profits to be made. In 1871, the Gazetteer of Towns recorded the following information about the Bigelow Bluestone Company. The Bigelow Bluestone Company employs about 200 hands and has 7 planing machines in operation for dressing the stone, getting it ready for shipment. A large number of vessels are employed in transporting the stone down to New York City and other places. The company made, now remember this figure here, the company in 1870 made over $1 million, okay, shipping stone out to the different destinations to where it was sent. According to a 1935 Freeman article reminiscing about the Bluestone era, the best bluestone came from Stony Hollow and West Hurley. Now, where's Stony Hollow and West Hurley? Well, we're back at the Cold Spring House by the Habitat for Humanity building on Route 28. Continue going north, all right? You'll come to Morey Hill on your right-hand side, and that's where the first quarry they know opened up there. And the road turns a little bit to the left and goes up a hill. and there is a barbecue smokehouse at the top of the hill. There are no signs there, welcome to Stony Hollow. There are no New York State historical blue markers. This was the site of one of the greatest stone quarries in Ulster County history. There's nothing there. Make a turn, go down that street, and you're in what's left of Stony Hollow. Stony Hollow that even made political news in the London Times in 1876. There's nothing there anymore but empty old houses. All right? So continue north on 28 and go off, or actually get on 28A, and you go up and you'll hit what was known as the area of West Hurley, but now you're going to be looking at the Ashokan Reservoir because West Hurley became underneath the reservoir. All right? But that's another story. Also, according to a 1935 Freeman article reminiscing about the Bluestone era, the best Bluestone came from Stony Hollow. Now, the famous Lawson quarries at that point shipped $4 million worth of stone and supported 1,500 persons living in 300 houses all along the area of what was once West Hurley, now under the Ashokan Reservoir. In his 1880 publication, The History of Ulster County, author Nathaniel Bartlett Sylvester stated the following about North River Bluestone. North River Bluestone in many respects is far superior to any other material nature has furnished ready-made or that the art of man has devised, and for these purposes it's in constant demand in every part of this country. So, if I go a little bit more here, all right, this would be an example of a large piece of flagstone that could be used for in front of a building in New York City. It's referred to as an Ulster County monolith measuring 24 feet by 20 feet. They didn't give the thickness there. But this was carted out, probably by steam machines at this time, but it was later hauled by horses down to the Roundout, to the docks along in Wilbur along the Roundout. But I'll show you some pictures about that in a minute. Okay? The next slide here is a stone quarry on Jockey Hill. And off to the side there, you can see a smokestack of a steam engine there powering the lifts here, the derricks that raise the stone up. And you can see how blocks of stone are being lifted by these derricks and brought over to the wagons, all right? And the other thing it doesn't show is the rock dust, right? And that's something else we'll talk about in a minute, what these workers had to go through. The next slide here, all right, is a bluestone quarry in the town of Kingston. And once again, it gives you an idea of the size of some of these stones that these workers, were able to carve out, all right, and then hoist up to be placed on wagons brought down to the Roundout shipping docks. So, according to a 1969 Freeman article looking back on the bluestone industry, the peculiar feature that gave bluestone its value for sidewalks, and New York was a big, big buyer, all right? Aside from the fact that it could split easily into slabs of varying thickness, and it could be worked smooth, it did not lend itself to polishing, and therefore never became slippery, making it ideal for sidewalks. According to an 1879 report in the periodical The Manufacturer and the Builder, the sidewalks of Fifth Avenue and other noted thoroughfares of New York, Boston, and Philadelphia require stone 15 feet long and from 8 to 12 feet wide, planed, axed, and finished in the best manner, bluestone being used largely for this purpose. Now, following New York City's stylish use of bluestone, okay, other cities in this nation would follow the same way, all right? Newport, Rhode Island, okay, used bluestone from Ulster County. Boston, Massachusetts, Yale University, New Haven, Connecticut, New York City, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Baltimore, Maryland, Charleston, South Carolina, San Francisco, California, New Orleans, Louisiana, and even Havana, Cuba. You could still find Hudson River or North River bluestone from the town of Kingston in those places and cities, all right? According to a New Orleans newspaper, the Daily Crescent, in 1859, all new curbstone which may be required to replace the broken or unfit old curbstones shall be of North River bluestone. According to the New York Times in 1867, houses built of stone or having stone fronts are the only kind which meets favored from the moneyed portion of our community. Brick houses are getting too common for the first-class fashionable circles and are left to be occupied by the more humble of people. Well, I would take one of those brick houses in Greenwich Village today, all right? But you can see here by 1867, brick, no, we want bluestone. and they could find it up in Kingston and also in the Port Jervis area. Aside from its decorative appeal and durability, Bluestone was also used for other purposes, having been advertised as a cure for cancer, alcoholism, injured animals, and diseased wheat called smut. According to a Jeffersonian Republican newspaper in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, 1842, Bluestone was one of the ingredients to be used as a, quote, certain cure for cancer if one followed the right directions, end quote. And the directions were: take a half an ounce of bluestone, a quarter of burnt copperas, a quarter of an ounce of burnt alum, half a quarter of an ounce of verdigris, and powder them all together. Now take the bluestone and the burnt mixture, add to that a half a pint of your best rum, and a tablespoon of honey. You can put it in a tin cup, set it on some live coals, and let it boil for a few minutes. Strain it through a fine cloth, put it into a vial, and apply it to the infected area. Well, did this elixir work? Well, in the same advertisement, we have a testimony from a James Neal, who stated, I do hereby certify that I had cancer in my lip and in the year 1823, and that the above remedy made a final cure. Well, thank you, Mr. Neal, all right? As the demand for bluestone grew, so did the need for workers to mine the stone in the quarries outside of Kingston. The need was met through a catastrophic event in Ireland that began in 1845. That event, known as the Angota Mór, right, was brought about through an airborne blight that destroyed the potato crops throughout Ireland, okay, bringing about a devastating famine that would kill nearly 1 million people and force another 2 million people to emigrate from the land. My grandmother, just a little aside here, my grandmother was born in 1881, and when I was in college, a long time ago, I sat down with her and I said, studying about the famine, did you ever hear about the famine? She goes, oh yeah, growing up, my parents told me about the famine. I said, well, what was it like? Did you hear anything? And they said, oh, it was terrible, because you could wake up one morning, you could go to bed one evening, and you had a big pile of potatoes in your cold storage locker, potatoes that you ate for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And you had a good crop of taters growing in the field there. Well, those potatoes would pay the rent, all right? And you'd wake up in the morning to a horrible stench. And you would run out to the field there, and all the potatoes rotted overnight. Now, I'm sure you've smelled a bad potato before, all right? Imagine a whole crop of potatoes, all right? And the potatoes in your pantry, they rotted as well. So I asked my grandmother, did the people know about it? She said, well, they didn't have the newspapers in the country area, but they heard about it. But they prayed it wouldn't come to their village. Well, did they ever have any forewarning? Oh, yeah. You woke up one morning and you could smell rotted potatoes, but it was in the air. But then you heard the screams of the women and the children from the village 4 or 5 miles away. Their screams were carried by the wind. You knew it was coming and prayed it didn't. But within a few days it came. So your whole future was now destroyed. You couldn't feed your family, you couldn't pay your rent, and now you were going to be evicted from the land. So between the years 1845 up to the 1860s, okay, 1.5 million Irish immigrants arrived in the port of New York, all right, as a result of that famine. So they came here from the land of famine to a land where many thought that the streets were paved with gold. It wasn't paved with gold. But the sidewalks and the curbing and the bridges and the monuments, they would all be lined and constructed with bluestone that these immigrants would quarry from the hills in the town of Kingston and elsewhere in the other counties, Orange and Sullivan counties, right? These immigrants were welcomed as a source of cheap labor. No fences back then barring them from entering the country, all right? Because they were needed as a source of cheap labor. And later on, they were used to fill the depleted rank of soldiers in the Union Army during the Civil War, all right? According to a New York City resident, George Templeton Strong, now some of you might remember him if you watched Ken Burns' epic documentary, The Civil War, but made reference to George Templeton Strong's diary. Well, one thing Mr. Burns didn't include was a little comment in his diary about the Irish. And according to Mr. Strong, I'm sorry to find that England is right about the lower class of Irish. They are brutal, base, cruel, cowards, and insolent as a base. My own theory is that St. Patrick's campaign against these snakes in Ireland is a popish illusion. These snakes perished by biting the Irish. Yeah. Oh, there's a lot of hatred, okay? My relatives, along with other hundreds of thousands of Irish immigrants who arrived in the port of New York, would eventually make their way up the Hudson River to the docks along the Rondout and work their way up to Stony Hollow, Jockey Hill, West Hurley, and elsewhere, and they began working in the quarries. According to the author, Carl Carmer, all right, the quarrying of Bluestone along the ledges at the foot of the Catskills was a colorful business. When stone boats left Jockey Hill and Stony Hollow over the old plank road for the Rondout landing, it took a big red-headed son of Galway to walk a man-sized slab. Now, I mentioned stone boats or stone barges, and just a little explanation of what they are. My father said that his family, the Donaldson, made barges. I said, okay, so there I am at Ulster County Archives and over at Orange County Community College and Ulster County Community College looking for barge industries, all right? This is the early years. Couldn't find anything about any family making barges until one old-timer said, no, they made stone barges. Oh, that was the name given to the wagons that carried the slabs of flat bluestone flagging down to the docks at Wilbur. They were called stone barges. So I know we have some people from the Hurley Historical Society there. That barge you have out in your shed might be built by William Donaldson, okay? And I still own it. No, I'm only kidding. In the 1870s, the New York Times would report at least 10,000 people in Ulster County gained their livelihood in the bluestone industry. Throughout the quarrying country, every hillside is dotted with cottages of the quarrymen, and the valleys that have their little hamlets have grown around these quarries. Hundreds of teamsters with their teams can be seen every morning before sunrise, winding their way to the quarries for the loads that will, by the end of the night, deliver the quarried stone down to the docks along the Rondout. The loads they carry are a marvel, their horses often hauling as much as 13 stones on one trip, while 10 tons of stone is a common ordinary load. According to the Rondout Courier of 1851, describing Hurley, the Hurley Woods. Most of the laborers, the quarrymen and teamsters of the Hurley as well as the Saltkill Range are Irishmen who, as a nation, seem to have a natural penchant for stonework. But through hard work it yields certain cash return, and vast sums are drawn to the cities of the Union, even to New Orleans, giving at least some subsistence to the workers at the Hurley Woods and along the Saltkill, while they really enrich the factors, the quarry owners or the shippers. We believe these rugged regions are healthful, though exposure and hardship and the lack of comfortable houses and varied food often generate fevers, and then the lack of near medical aid is an appalling drawback to the consideration above. Most of the inhabitants depend upon the Rondout, right, for their medical attendance, and the fearful sound must be a night call to the practitioner of this field, but such are a weekly occurrence, and the priest must be ever ready to provide the last ritual of consolations to the dying sheep of his fold. Author Alf Evers described the quarryman's boarding house in 1868 using the diary of James Butler at the time. According to Mr. Butler, describing a boarding house, what a miserable looking place that boarding house is. The walls are never lathed, all right? And there are chinks or holes in the wall as wide as a quarter of an inch. There are 4 or 5 men sitting around a stove with short clay pipes, black with use and age, stuck in their mouths. There were 3 women, all young looking, and 2 of them rather handsome. The youngest, named Conroy, is a greenhorn, a newcomer who was fetched from Castle Garden yesterday. As I looked at her innocent but not unhandsome face, I felt sorry to see her situated in such a place. One of the other women sat by a stove holding a baby, a rough-looking character who looked as if she was at the right place. She looked like she was the right woman in the right place. So what were the homes for the quarrymen like? And this is taken up at West Hurley, all right? It is a quarryman's home, and what you see behind the home are the piles of the loose stone that could not be sold. It's called rubbish, all right? Now, if you go up the Saltkill Road and find Jockey Hill Road on your left, all right? I mean, you pass the old St. Anne's Church and you pass the new town hall and you go about a half a mile up the road, you're going to come to a Jockey Hill Road. Go all the way up to a cul-de-sac. At that cul-de-sac, you'll see a little trail going into the woods. Go in there. Bring a bell or some noise, okay? Because you don't want to run into the black bears up there, which I had a little eye-to-eye encounter one day, right? But that's another story. You'll see the piles of rubbish stone, all right? And I think it's New York State property. I guess it's maintained by the Department of Environmental Conservation, so you can't take any stone out of there, although it's been reported that some stone merchants are going in there, taking out the rubbish stone and selling it, all right? But that's what a quarryman's house was like. Another quarryman's home, all right, is this one here, and this was taken up on Jockey Hill. This is a 16 by 30 foot home owned by the Booth brothers. Now, the Booth brothers were stone merchants in the city of Kingston. They owned quarry land throughout Jockey Hill area. And this was made up of 4 large rooms, all right? It could house a family or a number of quarrymen who would rent it. The house off to the side that you see on the right there, that was the summer kitchen. Right? During the winter, of course, the stove was kept inside, all right? That was your main source of heat. But during the summertime, all right, that stove was put out into a separate house, all right, much to the relief of the poor woman who had to do all the cooking. All right? Between the years 1919 and 1920, this was the one-room schoolhouse up at Jockey Hill. The other school building hadn't burnt down, all right? So they used this building as a schoolhouse. It is no longer standing today. All right. So in 1965, the Kingston Daily Freeman reporter Sophie Miller reflected on the lives of the quarrymen in her column, Do You Remember? And she wrote, Mr. Henry DeWitt Green, formerly of Kingston, now of Norfolk, Virginia, writes about a large quarry at Stony Hollow and also at West Hurley. These stone deposits were worked by men from Ireland who had learned their trade well from the old country. They could carefully drill holes in the rock by hand, fill the holes with black powder, and set off a blast with long fuses. He did remember premature blasts, which hurt many workers. He recalls going to a triple funeral at one time with his father, and the blast was so bad that none of the caskets could be opened, okay, during the services. Now, in the 1850s, in order to a plank road was constructed along the Ulster and Delaware Turnpike, which is now Route 28. The road was 11 miles in length and allowed bluestone taken from the quarries of West Hurley, Stony Hollow, and Jockey Hill to be transported down through the city of Kingston and down to the loading docks along the roundabout. All right. Though the plank road provided an easier trip for the teamster, all right, it could be dangerous for the horses who hauled the stone down every day. From the Poughkeepsie Eagle, September 1860. On Saturday last, as a team of horses was being driven down the plank road between Kingston, town of Kingston and Wilbur, one of the horses stepped a hind foot in a hole in the plank, and while struggling to extricate it, all right, the wheel ran upon its foot, and the poor brute, again renewing its effort to get free, pulled his foot entirely off. It lay in great agony until the next day, when it was put to death to relieve it from any more suffering. Later, slabs of bluestone were put in place, all right, along this route, all right, and we do have a picture of it. And you can see here now, this is when the Ashokan Reservoir, a number of years ago, I don't know if it was caused by a drought or they drained the water a bit, but they were able to find remains of the houses that was in the area of West Hurley, but they also found the plank road, the old Bluestone highway that came down the Ulster Delaware Turnpike, which is now Route 28. And you see how they put slabs of bluestone the width of a wagon wheel. And over months and months and months of use, all right, it gradually created a rut. So a teamster hauling a load of bluestone down to the docks in Wilbur, you know, could hitch up his wagon, okay, and say, giddy up, boy. And the wheels would follow the ruts all the way down to the city of Kingston. Now, going down, of course, bringing a heavy load was more dangerous than going up. All right, because you had to constantly apply the brake. You could not let this wagon going downhill with all that weight go over your horses, because your horses were valuable. But even though going home was easier, it could also be dangerous, because on the way home, it was well known among many of the teamster drivers to stop off at the Cold Spring House and have a little bit of liquid refreshment, all right, maybe a few too many. And as they came up to Stony Hollow and came to the railroad crossing, they would fall asleep, only to be hit by one of the trains coming down the tracks, okay? So there were many reports in the newspaper of the trains on the Ulster-Delaware line, okay, hitting stone barge wagons at Stony Hollow along the route, all right? In 1949, Freeman reporter Sophie Miller interviewed people who had grown up at the time when the plank road was used to transport stone from the areas of Stony Hollow and West Hurley all the way down to the docks at Wilbur. And she wrote, "A gentleman of 87 vividly recalls a team of horses pulling heavy wagons carrying bluestone from the old quarries over so many miles of Kingston's famous plank road. Sometimes as many as 8 horses were needed. Another gentleman told me that the wagons often were so heavy that they wore deep ruts into the heavy plank road, so that bluestone itself was laid in a double track, wagon wheel width, okay, which made the trip so much easier." So, to give you an idea what these stone barges look like, all right, there's a stone barge, okay, actually 2 barges there, carrying stone down to the docks at Wilbur. Now, we don't know which route this was, all right? These pictures here came from the Town of Kingston archives that Harry Simpson had gathered. Unfortunately, any notes that he attached to these pictures were lost. So all we know, it was somewhere in what is the old Town of Kingston. And just a little side note here. I keep referring to the Town of Kingston. Well, prior to 1880, the Town of Kingston was the largest town in Ulster County. It practically surrounded the city of Kingston, but today it's nothing but a small little hamlet town, all right? Because of the political intrigue, the town was divided in 1870, creating the town of Ulster, but again, that's another story. Oh, I do. Well, the book here is an anthology. All right? It's an anthology of the bluestone trade and the history of the town of Kingston, looking at all of these, using all of these newspaper articles and periodicals I found. I transcribed them all, and they're all in here. All right? So it's an anthology. You might not be interested in some of it, but you'd like to know about crime in the town of Kingston in the 1870s. There's a chapter on that. What was sickness, illnesses, disease, and accidents? Yeah, there's chapters on that. Advertisements in the Kingston, yeah, there's all in there, okay? So this is another stone barge, possibly coming back up because I don't see much of a load of stone in it, all right? And this we know is Harry Davies, okay, from Stony Hollow, all right? He was bringing a load of flagstone, all right, or curving stone, all right, on his horses, all right, down to the loading docks at Wilbur, all right? Harry Simpson wrote his name on the back, Harry Davies, okay? And he lived all his life in Stony Hollow and later died there, and he's buried at St. Anne's Cemetery. All right? And here's another stone barge driver going up to Saugerties, all right, which is what could possibly be Route 9W going up to Saugerties, probably to John Maxwell's yard, okay, to deliver the stone. All right. So now, thinking back on Vanderbilt stone, 25 feet by 15 feet, that Sullivan County got the credit for. Well, Ulster County had its share of large stones. So, though Vanderbilt's prize for the largest flagstone went to a quarry in Sullivan County, Ulster County had its share of stones, large stones. According to the Middletown Times Press, August 1892, the Kingston Freeman says that many large bluestones have been taken out of the quarries in Stony Hollow this season. Several passed through the upper part of the city recently. One weighed 14 tons. One passed down Wall Street the other day that weighed 15.5 tons. This was a very large stone covering 2 wagons drawn by 6 horses. We think we have a picture of it. And that's it. All right. Now, they said the stone passed Wall Street, all right? But there was no captions letting us know, was this Wall Street? So what I did was, I researched Bernstein's Emporium of Fashion, all right? And yes, they were located on North Front and Wall Street in the city of Kingston, all right? So it's quite possible, all right, that this stone here on this stone barge, all right, measuring 25 feet, okay, no, excuse me here, measuring 25 feet by 16 feet and weighing 20 tons, all right, could be that stone being brought down to the docks at Wilbur, all right? According to the Scientific American Journal of 1890, the largest stone by dimensions was 20 feet by 24 feet, 9 inches, and 10 inches thick. It weighed over 20 tons and was quarried in Saltkill between the years 1881 and 1890. All right. The heaviest recorded quarried stone measured 12 by 18 feet, 14 inches in thickness, and weighed 25 tons was recorded in the Kingston Daily Freeman in June 1889. It came from a quarry in Stony Hollow owned by E. Sweeney and Sons. Though there were profits to be made from those investing their money or labor in the bluestone industry, it was unpredictable and often risky. A promising quarry could turn out to have poor quality of stone. A decrease in the demand for stone could lower the amount paid for quarried stone, resulting in piles of stone accumulating at the docks along the Wilbur, which also meant that quarry workers could be put out of work. For the most part, the common quarry laborers, the teamster drivers, the cutters, and the planers did not make much in money. All right? In 1875, it was reported in the Kingston Argus, the common laborers are now receiving only 75 cents to $1.25 a day, and for the cutters of the stone, $1.50 to $1.75 a day, and these wages, it is claimed, are as high as can possibly be paid by those who employ them. So we don't have too many pictures of the quarry people, but this is a picture of a stone shaper along the docks at Wilbur, hand hewing some stone, getting it ready, most likely for curbing purposes, to be shipped down to New York City. All right? Years later, regarding the workers here, years later, a New York State legislature from Ulster County would state, if you've ever been to a stone quarry, you can appreciate what those men do. In the summer heat and the winter cold, the skilled workman drudges along and can scarcely get $2 a day, and a man and his two sons securing a fortune at quarry can earn maybe $14 to $15 a week. Well, you might say, well, that's not too bad. Well, wait a second. The quarries were only open between mid-March and mid-December. So in the latter half of December, January, February, to the middle of March, there was no income. The quarries were closed. Right? Now, God forbid if that quarryman blew his paycheck at the Cold Spring House, but there was nothing for these people on those Stony Hollow and Jockey Hill and West Hurley. All right? Oh, there was a tax poor relief fund, all right, that helped them out, but it was a hard life for these people. All right? For those, excuse me, for those quarrymen who leased prospective quarry lands, the earnings from a good loan of stone could be diminished by quarry rent, equipment costs, and transportation or cartage fees. According to a New York State Museum 56 annual report of 1902, the cartage fee was based on the value of the load of stone wagon, the distance between the stone quarry and the dock, and the condition of the road on which the wagon traveled. The cartage cost could run as high as 50% of the load or as low as 10 to 8%. On a good day, a team could make 3 or 4 trips. So it became very common at that time to label a quarry as a 3-trip quarry or a 4-trip quarry, depending upon your distance from the Wilbur docks. Besides low wages, quarrymen faced a constant threat of accidents and death from work-related injuries. Remember, the second half of the 19th century brought about a revolution in industry as well as construction throughout this nation. The constant demand for raw materials, building projects, and manufactured goods created thousands of jobs. While there was work to be had, there was little heed or care given to the working conditions that these people were forced to endure. Lacking federal and state safety codes, workers in the quarries suffered from short and long-term effects of the hazardous and unsafe working conditions in those quarries. Injuries and death resulting from rock slides, blasting accidents, being struck by flying stone, being run over by a stone barge were just some of the common accidents or risks these workers faced every day working in these quarries. According to a Poughkeepsie Eagle article, July 1853, on Tuesday of last week, an Irishman who had been but for a short time in this country, while at work at the dock at Wilbur, assisting a loading of vessel with flagging stone, fell to the ground from heat exhaustion and died the next day. On the same day, also, another Irishman at Jockey Hill was prostrated from heat of the sun. He was taken to his residence, but he died the following day. A team of horses died in the same place. From the Kingston Daily Freeman, June 1872, Edward Brophy of Stony Hollow, while at work in a Bluestone quarry on Tuesday last, had one of his eyes put out by a piece of iron flying from a sledgehammer and striking his eyeball, injuring it to such an extent that his sight was entirely destroyed. Thomas Muggins, employed by Michael Lamb in a stone quarry at Stony Hollow, had 3 of his toes on his right foot cut off by a large stone falling on him. From the Freeman, October 1892, James Donaldson, a prominent resident of Jockey Hill, was instantly killed the other day by flying stone from a blast in a quarry. He was setting off a battery connected to 7 blasts, all right, that would have been of gunpowder. The explosion came sooner than expected, and while Donaldson was running away, a flying stone struck him in the neck below the ear. The man fell in his tracks, and upon examination by Dr. Longren, all right, it was found that his neck was broken. Donaldson was a married man, 35 years of age, and a prominent person in this community. Well, James Donaldson was the first cousin of my grandfather, James Francis Donaldson. And from my research on the family, I knew about his death, and he also left a widow with 8 children with no support after his death. And remember, there was no Social Security or insurance for the people at that time. Now, those who avoid or survived physical injuries might have been lucky at first, but there was a slow, cruel fate awaiting those who labored for years in the quarries, breathing in the stone dust every day as they worked. The accumulated dust in their lungs brought about labored breathing, a condition similar to emphysema or similar to the black lung disease suffered by the coal miners in this nation. The hacking cough would eventually cripple the once strong men, no longer able to keep up with the demanding pace in the quarries, leaving a family destitute without a paycheck. At times, many doctors diagnosed this condition as tuberculosis. However, the illness is known as fibroiditis, I might be mispronouncing that there, brought about the inhalation of siliceous dust particles, all right? My great-grandfathers, Martin Stein and William Donaldson, along with William Donaldson's sons, James Francis Donaldson, my grandfather, and his brother George Donaldson, all died from this dust-related illnesses, okay? And you go to St. Mary's Cemetery, all right, over in Kingston, you can find the graves of all the Irish workers, okay, who stayed in the area and died, most likely from, working in the quarries. And go over to the Wiltwick Cemetery and see all the quarry owners, okay, with their beautiful monuments, okay. That caste system exists even in the cemeteries, okay, back then. Now, during the 1870s and the 1880s, the bluestone industry had its economic ups and downs due to an unpredictable nature of demand. Now, when there was demand for quarried stone, the industry flourished. And we look at some of these pictures here in 1875, okay, in the Ulster County Gazette here, they have the names of some of the stone dealers, okay, advertising their wares and also their offices in New York City, all right? And so those are the names of some of the people there. I'm just going to move a little ahead because what time is it?
It's okay.
Oh, good. When I taught, I never had a clock in my classroom. All right? Drive the students nuts, okay? So I had them in my control until the bell rang, okay? And if I could have disconnected the bell, I would have. Okay? This is the quarries of John Maxwell, a print of the Maxwell quarries, its loading dock area up in Saugerties, New York. Saugerties, New York was also a prominent stone shipping area at that time, all right? The next one here is the Bigelow, next one here is the Samuel and William B. Fitch's office, okay, along the roundabout in Kingston. Now this is from an 1875 print, and somebody asked before, did the wagons come all the way down to the docks? That's a steep grade going down. Yeah, and all these old prints, you can see the stone barges there, all right, and the wagons. Now, it's a really interesting structure. It was built in 1870, and it was the office of Samuel, and not his brother, but his cousin, William B. Fitch, okay? There's also another rumor that William B. Fitch had a problem with his son. I forgot his son's first name. The son didn't go into the bluestone industry, but got involved in the mercantile trade of clothing, and along with another man by the name of Abercrombie, set up Abercrombie and Fitch in New York City. But that's another story. Well, you might say, is that mansion still there? Yes, it is. Go down along the river, go up along the roundabout, go up Abeille Street, and travel it around there, and there it is, the ghost of the roundabout, built in 1870. The last report I read, it's owned by an attorney out of Brooklyn, but it's, you're really coming to a depressed area, and suddenly you're faced with this building, and it's really an awesome sight to see.
Can we take a look at the last shot?
What's that?
Can we take a look at the last photo just to compare it?
Oh, sure. There you go.
Wow.
All right, and that's the office there according to the print. All right, that's the roundout there. This direction here would be going out to Kingston Point. All right, to give you a perspective on what direction it would be. And let's see how good it is. Yeah, it's not bad. Yes.
That was designed by John A. Wood,
Mhm.
the architect. He did a lot of wonderful buildings in the Kingston area.
Yeah.
And the Armory on Broadway
Sure.
was done by him.
Also, I don't know if he's the architect, but there were beautiful homes along Ulster Avenue there, and they were owned by some of the prominent Bluestone merchants. Now, compared, this is the office, all right? And you remember the picture of the quarryman's house up in West Hurley with the piles of rubbish in the backyard, all right? Or the boarding house there with the outdoor kitchen. Wow, what an amenity to have, okay? Let's move on here, all right? And these are all the pictures of the docks. Now, you might say, hey, business is good. It might not be good. There might not be a demand for Bluestone, right? And all these piles of flagstone just built up along the docks, and so the price of stone went down and quarries went out of business, all right? These are other pictures here. I'm just going to go along here. This would be a planing mill along the docks in Wilbur, all right, where the stone was brought in on tracks, on wagons, and as they went through, they had these steam machines kind of like not polishing the stone, but planing it down to make it nice and even, okay, to be used along the sidewalks in the city. All right. This is another example of the Fitch's loading dock, taken from a different perspective there. So you can see the amount of stone that that built up along these docks, as well as the sloops and the barges that would carry the stone by ship down to New York City. This is along the roundabout. There's more flagging stone there that would be used for sidewalks. Preparing stone for loading along the docks of the roundabout. And this would be preparing stone again along the docks here. And that's another picture taken from above of the loads of stone.
The old bridge.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So at the time of the heyday of the Bluestone, what was the coal industry coming from Pennsylvania?
Yeah, they would come up and
was
use
that
the
already
canal.
a past industry at this point or no?
I don't know. No, coal was still being used, but if the coal came up the canal, it passed right along through here.
Yeah.
But that was a whole different trade. But there was another competitor at that time sneaking in right across the roundabout, heading south, okay? That was Portland Cement, which I'll talk about in a minute here. We'll get to that, all right? That would become the main competitor to Bluestone. Now, when there was a decrease in demand for the quarried stone, hard times would follow. The economic panic of 1873, along with the slowdown of construction in New York City, brought about a decrease in price paid for the quarried bluestone throughout the quarries in the towns of Ulster County. Inevitably, many quarry laborers were laid off as small quarry owners and renters closed their quarries. Unemployment led disgruntled men to fight back, calling two labor strikes, one in 1875 and another in 1876. From the notes of Harry Simpson, July 1875. The quarrying of stone developed strong and hard men, also hard leaders, and therefore it is little wonder that when the price of stone dropped down near the cost of the cartage or the transportation fee and the rental charges, the leaders of Jockey Hill and Stony Hollow called to strike. According to the Kingston Daily Freeman, July 1875, the Bluestone quarrymen are suffering what they feel to be serious hardships out of the low prices received for them for the stone. The buyers, on the other hand, assert that they are overstocked. All right? There you go, overstocked. All right? And for months have been buying only because they could not see when and how to stop, the truth of which is attested by the enormous quantity of stone piled up in several yards along the docks at Wilbur. Now, by the end of summer of 1875, very little was accomplished by the strike. And many of the men who could not find work, they moved elsewhere, up into Delaware County or elsewhere looking for some form of work. All right? The following year, in 1876, things weren't much better. There was no improvement in the demand for bluestone, which brought about an additional decrease in the amount dealers would pay for quarried stone, which also was reflected in the amount these workers would receive every day working in the quarry. The decreasing price, compounded by the ever-increasing cartage or transportation fees, forced the smaller quarry owners and the renters now to lay off their workers. So according to the Kingston Daily Freeman, May of 1876, Quarrymen who used to hire 10 to 15 laborers are now discharging the men, being unable to pay them. A few days ago, a man disposed of a large load of stone, and after the wholesale dealer at Wilbur had deducted all the cartage fees, there only remained 60 cents, to which the driver said, "You can keep the 60 cents, I will donate it to your place." Right? It is certainly hard on the laborers, but there does not seem to be any help for them at the present. Now, with little or any work to be found elsewhere in the area, idle workers began to gather and to listen to more vociferous of their leaders. Social unrest would soon follow. During the strike of 1876, my great-grandfather William Donaldson and his sons refused to close their quarry, going to work one day. All right. Strikers, referred to as red shirts, visited the quarry and threatened them, according to the notes of Harry Simpson. On June 2nd, 1876, the quarrymen of Stony Hollow went on strike. The Donaldsons were ordered by the red shirts not to work their quarry. They went to the quarry despite the warning. On arrival, the red shirts, they fled. The Donaldsons fled to the Joy homestead at Xena, where they stayed until the next day. Now, I'm sitting in the old town of Kingston Hall in the one-room schoolhouse going through these archives, and I'm reading these notes typed up by Harry Simpson, and these are my ancestors. But there's Joy residence. So the clerk off to the side was Laura Joy. So I went up to her and said, "Laura, do you know anything about the Joy residence in Xena?" She goes, "Oh yeah, that was my great-grandfather." Well, your family saved my family. So on behalf of the Donaldsons, I thank you again. Again, okay, according to the notes of Harry Simpson, all right. The strike of 1876 did bring out destruction attributed to the rebellious strikers. According to the Kingston Daily Freeman, June 1876, on Wednesday morning about 4 o'clock, the Ulster and Delaware Railroad Bridge across the Esopus Creek near Higginsville was found to be on fire. The fire burned the timbers off, the blaze going up 100 feet or more when that end of the bridge dropped into the creek, making a tremendous report as the iron gave way. The bridge was not insured and cost about $20,000. The bridge was undoubtedly destroyed by strikers or their friends. Such threats and actions indicate a worse spirit than is shown by the frenzied communists of Paris and ought to be put down at all hazards. Again, from the notes of Harry Simpson. Right? As the strike continued, the young men became discouraged and left for the hayfields of Delaware County and the quarries along the Delaware River. That would have been down in Port Jervis, New York. The strike lasted 6 months, and nothing was accomplished by the strike. Aside from the labor unrest and failure of the strike, there was one good result, according to the Freeman, July 1876. The strikers in the stone quarries have done a good thing for their poor horses this season. The horses must enjoy the long respite from the work and ill treatment. If a meeting of the horses in the stone drawing line could be called, it is quite certain that a resolution would be adopted in favor of a strike about the same time every year. Now, during the 1870s, there were signs that the Bluestone industry would not last forever. Along with the economic panic of 1873, the exposures of the antics of Tammany Hall under the leadership of Boss Tweed, along with other corrupt practices and businesses in New York City, led to a decrease in construction projects, which resulted in a decrease in demand for Bluestone. The decline of projects resulted in a decrease in orders of stones, forcing many of the quarries to close up and, of course, lay off their workers. According to the Freeman, May of 1873, the stone trade is much depressed, orders being exceedingly dull and money scarce. In New York City, the demand is very slight, there having been nothing manual done since the overthrow of the Tweed dynasty, whose lavish measures of improvement required large expenditures for sidewalks and buildings, etc. Most likely the famous Tweed courthouse in the lower end of Manhattan. By the 1880s, many of the old quarries in the town of Kingston had become exhausted due to over-quarrying. Quarry owners and laborers began to look elsewhere in the state for bluestone. According to the Freeman, March 1883, all available quarries have been exhausted. After you work down from 4 to 6 feet, you exhaust all the good stone and reach sand rock, which is worth nothing and upon which nothing grows. 25 years ago, there were a good many quarries there and men made money, but today they are substantially worthless. The slow decline in the bluestone industry impacted other commercial businesses in the Kingston area. From the Freeman, July 1877. The dearth caused by the scarcity of stone and the exodus of quarrymen is not alone faced in the flagging districts of the town, but is equally felt at Wilbur and the upper part of the city of Kingston, particularly among the Higginsville storekeepers, who, when business was good, carried on a brisk trade with the inhabitants of these western districts. But by the 1870s now, Portland cement was becoming a growing competitor to the bluestone industry and was beginning to show economic gains. According to the Freeman, September 1879, the Portland Cement Works at East Kingston report progress and are manufacturing cement in many instances superior to the imported German article, hardening to a flinty clearage. The mixing and drying rooms are working successfully. In 1935, looking back on the decline of the bluestone industry, the Freeman would report, Bluestone quarrying was at its height in 1895 and 1896. I might debate that, but then out of the sky came the industrial disaster to the area, Portland cement. In 3 years from the peak of its volume, bluestone quarrying ceased to show a profit. The large operations quickly wilted, although small quarries continued a meager existence for some 15 years. Some continued in a haphazard manner even until today. Now, we do have some prints taken at that time, all right? This would be in Rosendale Cement Works here. This was taken about 1875, showing the early cement works in Rosendale, all right? In this print, and in the next print here, shows another one here, the Rosendale Mine and Cement Company. This would become the major competitor for Bluestone, all right? Aside from over-quarrying, all right, the demand for cement would practically destroy the bluestone industry. So how do we know? I looked at censuses and I started counting up, how many quarrymen were in the census. So in 1880, there were 234 quarrymen just in the town of Kingston. The reduced town of Kingston, there were 234 quarrymen, all right? Out of those 234 quarrymen, 33 children between the ages of 12 and 17 years old, 14% of the labor force worked in those stone quarries. Now, as the demand for bluestone decreased, so too did the number of men who worked in these quarries. All right. During the years, as I mentioned before, many of these men who could no longer find employment in the quarries moved elsewhere. According to the Freeman, all right, in 1883, no one lives at Jockey Hill but old men who are too old to go away, and women and widows and children. All the young men who were able to get away have gotten out of town, and the old folks would follow them if they only knew how to get out of the town. By the 1890s, the unpredictable became predictable. Though some newspapers offered optimistic hope at the start of the quarrying season, that optimism was crushed by the growing decrease in orders for stone. Now, by 1900, there were only 114 men employed in the bluestone quarry industry in the town of Kingston. That was down 120 workers from the 1880 census. By 1903, there were only 103 men working in the stone quarries in the town of Kingston. The bankers' panic of 1907 and 1908 also caused significant hardship for the stone quarries. According to the Freeman, January 1908, the volume of business in greater New York has not been up in the past 2 years. The business outlook for the coming season is too darkened by the financial cloud at present to discern what is in store for the coming year. We have every reason, however, to expect a normal year if financial matters can get back to being normal in time. But by April of 1908, things had not improved with the bluestone industry. Again, according to the Freeman, the quarrymen in this vicinity are becoming discouraged over the delay in buying stone. Many are leaving for positions elsewhere, and the remainder are threatening to do so. If hard times continue, Saltkill will be a thing of the past. By 1910, there were 72 quarrymen in the town of Kingston. Out of those 72 men, there were also 8 Italian and Polish Russian immigrants working in the quarries. By 1913, economic decline of bluestone industry in Ulster County was evident in the declining figures of the trade. Remember that back in 1871, all right, the Bigelow Company made close to $1 million in profit, and the Lawson Quarry produced over $4 million in profit in stone. But by 1913, things were different. In 1913, the total product of Bluestone trade amounted only to $753,510. By 1914, things didn't get any better. The total amount produced in Bluestone in 1914 was $546,314, down almost $200,000 from the previous year. By 1915, the Bluestone industry in Ulster County was practically done in, and there was little optimism for better times ahead. According to the Freeman, April 1915, the Bluestone business, we are very sorry to say, does not have a very bright outlook at present, as dealers have discontinued buying stone and shipping it to New York City. By 1960, homeowners in the city of Kingston began shunning Bluestone for another material for their sidewalks. According to the Freeman, June 1916, it seems folly for the citizens of Kingston, in the heart of the finest Bluestone district in the world, to discard their fine Bluestone sidewalks and substitute concrete for that great stone. By 1920, there were only 18 quarry workers in the town of Kingston. In the 1922 Department of Internal Affairs report, The Flagstone Industry in Northeastern Pennsylvania near Port Jervis, New York, a geologist reported, Portland cement has virtually cornered the market in sidewalk material. Where once flagstone quarries employed nearly 1,000 men, there are now less than 50 quarrymen, and most of these are doing a very small, desultory business. After 1920, there were a number of attempts to revitalize the industry, but to no avail. However, some people did look back and try to use Bluestone for its historical reasons. One of those persons was President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who used Ulster County Bluestone, town of Kingston Bluestone, on his retreat house at his estate in Hyde Park. Local Bluestone aids the building of the President's House, from the Freeman, October 1938. Ulster County Bluestone will stand as a monument to an area industry for a house to be used by President Roosevelt at his retreat at his estate in Hyde Park. Several truckloads of Bluestone were ordered for the building of a porch and a fireplace at the President's new Hyde House. Now, during the 1980s and 1990s, if you read the New York Times, there were a number of articles showing how people in Brooklyn, in the Park Slope section of Brooklyn, were finding Bluestone underneath the old sidewalks, and they were saying, hey, let's bring it back. And so there was this desire, and people were gathering up Bluestone and using it along their sidewalks and curbing. So the papers kind of said they would hope that it would bring about a demand for Bluestone, all right? But will it revive the industry in the old town of Kingston? No. All right? Most of those quarries are depleted of the good quality stone that once came from there. So, somewhat in conclusion here, as I walk up East Market Street here, or I'm up in Hudson walking down Warren Street, I always tell my wife, Mel, look what's down there. She goes, yes, Bob, flagstone. Okay, that flagstone probably came from Sorgady's or from here in Rhinebeck here. I said, that flagstone probably came from over in the town of Kingston. All right, that flagstone was laid over 120 years ago, and it's still being used today. I would hope that 100 years from now, okay, or if I look back, I look at now and after this meeting tonight, as you walk down these streets and you'll see the flagstone, you'll say to yourselves, I know from where it came, right? But I would like to hope that 100 years from now, that same Bluestone will be here or up in Kingston, up in Hudson, or other cities where it was laid, all right? Still being used and hopefully appreciated by the people. I would think that if you could go into a time machine and go into the future and stop the people and say, do you know from where this flagstone came? They would most likely respond, I'm blessed if I know. Thank you very much. You were very nice.